On a freezing night, police officers forced a man to do push-ups in the cold, not knowing that he would later become their new chief. How will he respond to this humiliation and restore justice? Don't forget to subscribe and share in the comments where you're watching the video. On a cold winter night, snow blanketed the deserted road, and thick darkness engulfed the surroundings. Only faint starlight and a few gusts of icy wind swept across the lonely road, creating a silent, distant scene. The area was so quiet that it might have felt peaceful, but for Mike Anderson, the silence felt cold and isolating. It was nearly midnight, and Mike was driving home after a long day at work. The business meeting downtown had lasted longer than he'd planned, and all he wanted now was to get home, sit on his favorite couch, pour a glass of strong liquor, and unwind in front of the TV. However, as he drove along the snow-covered, empty road, his car suddenly jerked and came to a halt. The engine warning light began flashing on the dashboard, signaling an unexpected problem. Mike frowned, staring at the warning light on the dashboard. He felt irritated that this inconvenience had happened just when he wanted to get home after a long day. What's more, he wasn't particularly knowledgeable about cars, and fixing it himself in the biting cold was the last thing he wanted. Outside, the temperature had dropped significantly, and thick snow covered the surrounding road. With no other options, Mike turned on the hazard lights and decided to step outside to check the engine. He pulled his coat tighter, feeling the biting cold immediately as he opened the car door. The icy road underfoot made him step carefully, one step at a time, to avoid slipping. All around there was only darkness and a chilling silence, so intense that he could hear the wind whistling across the snowy fields. He opened the hood, his hands shaking with cold as he tried to check the engine. His fingers gradually went numb as he tried to figure out what was wrong, even though he knew his car repair knowledge was close to none. His breath turned to mist before him, underscoring the harshness of the winter night. While he was fumbling with the engine, Mike suddenly saw a light approaching from afar, a strong beam cutting through the darkness and coming closer. He paused, breathing a sigh of relief, hoping someone was coming to help. As the vehicle drew nearer, Mike realized it was a police patrol car. The bright patrol car lights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the area around him. A mixture of relief and apprehension arose within him. As a black man standing alone on a deserted road late at night, Mike knew he had to be cautious. The patrol car stopped beside him, and two officers stepped out. The older one, with a stocky build and a stern expression, was David Walker. David sported a thick mustache, giving him a serious look while his cold eyes showed no hint of friendliness. The other officer, a young man named Steve Parker, had an arrogant and impatient air. Steve's sharp eyes and unfriendly demeanor made Mike feel uneasy. David approached Mike, raising a bright flashlight and shining it directly into his face. The light forced Mike to squint. "Having trouble with your car?" David asked in a flat tone, devoid of friendliness or concern. Mike tried to remain calm, responding gently, "Yes, my car suddenly stopped and I'm trying to figure out what went wrong." Steve stood nearby, arms crossed with a slight smirk. "What a perfect place to have car trouble, right?" he muttered, just loud enough for Mike to hear. Steve's tone was full of sarcasm, and Mike immediately sensed that neither officer intended to help. His heart raced as he realized he might be facing a situation far more serious than just a car breakdown. Mike kept his hands visible, trying not to make any moves that could be misinterpreted. Unpleasant memories of past encounters with the police surfaced, reminding him to be cautious. He could feel the officers' suspicious and indifferent gazes, and an uneasy feeling gradually spread within him. Mike stood by his broken-down car, trying to remain calm as the two police officers approached him. All he wanted was to get home, but it seemed like things were about to get more complicated. David Walker, the older officer with a thick mustache and a cold, sharp gaze, stepped closer, shining his flashlight directly into Mike's face, causing him to squint. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" David's tone was flat, without a hint of friendliness. Mike took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just got back from a meeting downtown. My car suddenly broke down, and I was just checking to see if I could fix anything myself." He kept his hands visible, avoiding any movement that might be misinterpreted. Steve Parker, the younger officer, stood with his arms crossed next to David, smirking. "A meeting? Ending at this hour, on a deserted road like this?" Steve sneered, his voice full of sarcasm and derision. He stood there, arms folded, looking at Mike with thinly veiled contempt, seeming to relish the power he thought he had over someone he deemed powerless. Mike kept his composure. He had been in situations like this before and knew that reacting angrily would only worsen things. However, inside, a simmering anger was building. Memories of past encounters with police came rushing back, reminding him of the injustices he had endured. But this time was different. They had no idea the man they were mocking would soon become their new chief. David stepped even closer, shining his flashlight across every inch of Mike's car without asking permission. "Anything suspicious in your car? Let me check," he said, not waiting for Mike's response, and proceeded to open the door and rummage through the interior. Mike clenched his fists, restraining his anger, keeping his voice and expression neutral. He knew that resisting would only escalate the situation. Steve shrugged, adding a mocking comment. "I'm sure you don't mind if we take a look. Who knows what someone like you could be doing out here at this time of night?" Steve's gaze swept over Mike, assessing him as though he were a criminal rather than someone dealing with a car breakdown. Mike stood in silence, keeping as calm as possible. Their insults were like knives piercing his pride. His self-control, honed through years of enduring similar injustices, was being tested more than ever. Inside, he resented having to tolerate their scorn, but he knew that in this situation, silence was the safest choice. "Where do you live?" David continued, his eyes fixed on Mike as though expecting a confession. "I live in the suburbs, just a few miles from here," Mike answered shortly, not wanting to offer more information than necessary. Steve smirked, arms crossed, stepping closer to Mike with a look of disdain. "Pretty cold out here, isn't it? Think you might want to warm up with some exercise?" His tone was laced with mockery. "Maybe a few push-ups to keep you warm?" Mike looked at them, feeling his heart race as anger surged through his veins. He knew they were exploiting their authority to humiliate him, satisfying their sense of power. But he restrained himself, choosing not to retaliate, remembering that these men didn't know he was soon to be their superior. A truth he decided to keep hidden until he officially took office. David and Steve stood there, looking at him smugly as if they could toy with him for as long as they pleased. They were oblivious to the fact that their actions tonight would soon face a different reality. And while Mike felt humiliated and angry, he also strengthened his resolve to bring justice to those who had suffered similar treatment. At this moment, however, Mike had no choice but to silently comply, hiding his true identity and enduring their ridicule. He knew that now wasn't the time to reveal the truth or confront them, but in his heart he'd already made a decision. Once he took office, He would ensure such abuses of power would not be tolerated within his department. That night, on the freezing road, this injustice became the motivation he needed to bring change and to protect others from having to endure what he had just experienced. Mike knelt on the freezing snow, hands pressed against the icy ground, preparing to do what David and Steve had ordered: push-ups. The cold from the snow seeped through his clothes, piercing his skin with a stinging chill. All he wanted was to get this over with and escape the humiliating situation. Yet, the contemptuous looks and smirks on the two officers' faces made him realize that this was only the beginning. David stood nearby, flashlight aimed directly at Mike's face, his voice sharp and mocking. "Come on, Anderson. A guy like you should be strong, right? A few dozen push-ups in this cold should be no problem, huh?" Steve laughed mockingly, folding his arms beside David. "Or are you so weak that a few push-ups are already too much?" Mike kept his face expressionless, swallowing his humiliation to avoid making things worse. With a brief hesitation, he started doing push-ups, each movement accompanied by the icy sting of the ground beneath his palms. Every push-up felt like a blow to his pride, but he remained calm, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "Hurry up, Anderson," David shouted, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he watched Mike kneel under their authority. "You're a man. Shouldn't you be stronger than this?" Steve, with a sly grin, added more taunts. "If you can't even handle a few push-ups, maybe we should take you back to the station to rest a little." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a threatening tone. "Who knows? You might even have a little accident there." Mike felt anger simmering inside, but knew he had to control himself. Any reaction could give the officers an excuse to escalate things. Each push-up cut deeper into his pride, but he maintained his composure, breathing steadily to avoid appearing tired or weak. In his mind, his father's advice about staying calm and giving them no reason replayed. But tonight, those words felt far from comforting. David moved closer, nudging Mike's leg as if he were nothing more than an object. "Come on, try harder, Anderson. You're strong, right? Or is your strength only good against weaker people?" David's words dripped with sarcasm and contempt. Mike stayed calm, though every muscle in his arms ached from the cold. He could feel the triumphant gaze of David and Steve as he complied with their orders. Every insult, every smirk, was like a knife digging into his pride. He had built his career from the ground up, proven himself in a world full of prejudice, but now he was being treated like a worthless criminal simply because of his skin color. "I think we should give him a few more exercises," Steve suggested, winking at David. "How about a few laps around the car? That should warm him up nicely." Mike looked at the two officers, his gaze steady but without challenge. He knew they were testing his patience and pride, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. Memories of past injustices surfaced in his mind, fueling his resolve. He knew that soon, once he officially took his position as their new chief, he would have the chance to put an end to such abuses of power. David leaned down, inches from Mike's face, speaking slowly. "Anderson, remember tonight. If you don't want to see us again, it's best to stay away from places like this. Accidents can happen any time, and nobody would believe your story." Mike took a deep breath, holding himself back from reacting. He knew that any hint of defiance could make things more dangerous. Slowly, he stood up, slightly unsteady from his stiff muscles. He looked directly at David and Steve, showing neither fear nor challenge. He knew this wasn't the time for confrontation, but he silently promised himself he wouldn't let this behavior continue. David took a step back, face still twisted with contempt. All right, Anderson, go home and remember what we said. Next time won't be this easy. Steve smirked, satisfied as he watched Mike trudge back to his car. Hope you learned something tonight, he said, mockingly, his cold eyes following Mike until he opened the car door and sat inside. Mike sat in the car without starting the engine. He felt the sting of humiliation rises in his chest, mingling with a fierce determination. He wouldn't let this night go forgotten. He would wait until he officially took his position, and then he would stand up to protect others from experiencing what he had endured. On this cold, lonely road, he wasn't just enduring humiliation, he was making a vow to bring about change. As David and Steve got into their patrol car and drove off, Mike sat in the dark, feeling his resolve grow stronger than ever. He knew that soon, when the truth was revealed, those who abused their power would face the consequences of their actions that night. The next morning, the atmosphere at the police station was buzzing as if a fresh wind had swept through. Officers gathered in small groups exchanging intriguing stories about the new chief expected to arrive. Most had only heard rumors, but everyone knew this would be a strict, decisive leader, a no-nonsense man in every sense. The veteran officers, including David and Steve, still thought it was just another rumor, believing that the newcomer would soon yield to the unspoken order within the station. As the front doors opened and Mike Anderson stepped in, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to the tall, confident man in his formal police uniform, emanating an undeniable authority. No one knew Mike was the man David and Steve had humiliated the night before. But as Mike entered, his steely gaze and calm command immediately quieted the entire room. David and Steve were standing in a corner, stunned and pale as they realized that the new chief was none other than the man they had disrespected and forced to do push-ups in the cold only hours ago. Their hearts raced with fear as they realized their actions wouldn't be forgotten or ignored. They exchanged uneasy glances, trying to keep a composed exterior as curious colleagues watched. Without showing a hint of resentment, Mike maintained a calm, professional demeanor, stepping up to the podium to formally address his new colleagues. He made no mention of the previous night's events, keeping an air of solemn authority that froze the room. His presence was a silent declaration of the change to come, a change that could not be evaded. Beside Mike was Thomas, a seasoned officer who had spent much of his career in the police force. Thomas had witnessed countless abuses of power over the years and had long hoped for a leader with enough resolve and fairness to restore the station's integrity. With Mike's arrival, Thomas felt a renewed hope and was ready to support him on this challenging journey. "Chief Anderson," Thomas greeted with a respectful smile, "welcome to our station. I look forward to helping you make this place trustworthy for both our team and the community." Thomas's voice was clear and firm, showing absolute faith in Mike. Mike nodded, returning a grateful smile. "Thank you, Thomas. It's an honor to work alongside you. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but with the support of dedicated people like you, I believe we can make the necessary changes." Thomas smiled, nodding warmly. His presence beside Mike not only showed his support, but also signaled to the other officers that Mike would not be fighting alone. He had a reliable ally, making him even more resolute in his upcoming decisions. As Mike took the podium, he looked around the room with a steady, commanding gaze. "I didn't come here to make friends," he began in a calm but unwavering voice. "I am here to ensure that this station operates with integrity, fairness, and respect. From now on, no abuse of power will be tolerated, and together we will rebuild the trust of the community we serve." Each word Mike spoke resonated in the silent room, creating an atmosphere that was tense yet solemn. The veteran officers felt the weight of the man standing before them, a true leader, unafraid of challenges and intolerant of wrongdoing. Among the crowd, David and Steve felt Mike's gaze piercing them, reminding them of what they had done the night before. They tried to avoid eye contact, attempting to hide their unease, but guilt and fear were evident on their faces. They knew their actions could no longer be ignored and that Mike would likely bring their abuse of power to light. Thomas, who had witnessed numerous instances of misconduct within the station, stood beside Mike, his voice ringing with authority. "You all heard what Chief Anderson just said. A new era has begun, and we will work together to make this place an organization the community can fully trust." He looked around at his colleagues, particularly at David and Steve, with a cold stare, making them shift uncomfortably. After Mike's address, the officers dispersed quietly, leaving behind a tense yet solemn atmosphere. The officers exchanged cautious glances, murmuring about the new chief and the changes he might bring. Some were excited, while others, particularly those accustomed to abusing power, felt a looming fear and anxiety. David and Steve stayed back, faces etched with unease. They realized that Mike was not someone they could easily disregard. They exchanged worried glances, wondering if he knew about the events of the previous night. And if he did, what would happen to them in the days ahead? In his office, Mike sat in his chair, gazing out the window with a thoughtful look. He knew his journey here had only begun, and that there were many challenges ahead. But with the support of people like Thomas, he felt he could face anything. The insults of the previous night now served as a powerful motivation, driving him forward with a fierce resolve to bring the change this station so badly needed. Thomas entered the office, quietly closing the door behind him and looking at Mike with deep respect. "Chief Anderson, I've been here a long time and have seen a lot of things happen. But I believe you are the person we need to set this unit back on the right path." Mike nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Thank you, Thomas. I know it will take time and the support of people like you to bring about real change, but I promise you, we're going to make this a place worthy of the public's trust." And at that moment, he realized that it wasn't just him. This entire unit was entering a period of great transformation. Since taking office, Mike Anderson began his work with a meticulous and quietly powerful plan. He showed no signs of urgency or anger. Instead, he maintained a rare patience, coupled with a subtle approach to gradually uncover the truth. With years of experience under his belt, Mike understood that to root out the abusive behavior of David and Steve, he needed more than courage. He needed strategy and perseverance. One of Mike's first strategies was to establish close and trusting relationships with his colleagues at the station. Under the guise of regular team meetings and discussions on the importance of professional ethics, Mike quietly built rapport with honest, dedicated officers. He knew that to gain the support of his teammates, he had to show them he was a fair leader who wouldn't tolerate any wrongdoing. In these gatherings, Mike often posed questions subtly about how the officers worked and the challenges they faced, and listened to their frustrations within the team. Thomas, a loyal friend and longtime colleague in the force, played a crucial role in Mike's discreet investigation. Thomas was not only the one who helped Mike gather information, but also a bridge helping him understand the complex relationships within the station. He had witnessed many injustices and abuses of power over the years, and now, under Mike's leadership, Thomas felt he finally had the chance to stand up for the justice he had long silently hoped for. Chief Anderson," Thomas said passionately in a private meeting between the two, "many people in this station want to see change, but they've never had the chance to speak up. For far too long, wrongdoings were ignored or even covered up, but I believe you're the one who can make this happen." Mike nodded, his gaze firm and sharp. "Thank you, Thomas. I know that real change requires patience. We won't rush. They'll reveal themselves if we let them think everything is still fine. I want everyone to feel they can trust me, to share what they've experienced without fear." Under Mike's leadership, the police station began to show small but noticeable changes. He organized more open discussions on ethical principles, emphasizing that police officers are protectors of the community and that anyone abusing their position would face consequences. These weren't just empty words. Mike conveyed his message with absolute seriousness, making the officers feel as if they were standing before a real leader, not just a distant superior who merely issued orders. Those who had remained silent about David and Steve's behavior started to realize they could trust Mike. Private conversations began to emerge, and many people started sharing their unfortunate experiences or those of community members regarding the abusive behavior of these two officers. These stories, though simple, helped paint a clear picture of the abuse and disdain David and Steve had inflicted. As he gathered more information, Mike saw that David and Steve's actions went beyond just sarcastic remarks or idle threats. There were confidential reports from colleagues and the very community they patrolled, revealing that David and Steve often used their power to intimidate and even exploit innocent citizens. There was an instance where a young man was intimidated and coerced for daring to question their fairness. Another woman shared that they had threatened her to keep silent about an incident she had witnessed. These revelations only strengthened Mike's resolve to bring their misconduct to light. As the atmosphere at the station gradually shifted, David and Steve began to feel uneasy. Initially, they assumed the tension was due to the new leadership and that things would quickly return to normal. But when they noticed that many colleagues who previously remained silent were now giving them cold stares, they started to worry that something bigger was happening. The suspicion grew, making them feel that every action and every decision they made was being watched and that they no longer enjoyed the same freedom as before. While David and Steve tried to maintain a calm exterior, they couldn't prevent the rumors from spreading within the station. Stories about their abuse of power started to be whispered discreetly among colleagues. Other officers, especially those who had endured the arrogance of these two, began sharing personal stories of their encounters with David and Steve. It seemed that a wall of silence they had once built was now crumbling, and the truth was gradually being revealed. One day, Mike held a private meeting with senior officers and a few trusted colleagues, including Thomas and others who had provided information to him. In this meeting, Mike presented the evidence he and Thomas had gathered from the community and from within the team. It was clear that David and Steve were not only abusing their power, but were also seriously undermining the community's trust in the police. "It's time for us to act," Mike said in a steady yet firm voice. "This evidence shows that David and Steve have crossed every line and must be held accountable. They can no longer hide behind their badges." Thomas, sitting next to Mike, nodded in agreement. "I've waited a long time for this day. We need to do this to show everyone in the station that justice is never forgotten." Mike smiled at his teammates, feeling the trust and support from those around him. He knew this was the right time to confront David and Steve. He had prepared everything, from witnesses ready to testify to documents and records of the two officers' actions. There was no need to rush, as the truth was powerful enough to force them to face the consequences. When David and Steve entered the meeting room, they exchanged a glance, both trying to appear composed. But Mike easily noticed the underlying anxiety in their eyes. They had realized something was wrong, but tried to reassure themselves that this was just a routine confrontation. Mike quietly waited for them to sit down, holding a few seconds of silence to build tension in the room. "Thank you both for coming," Mike began, his voice calm and composed but carrying an underlying authority. Slowly, he stood up, looking directly at them with a piercing gaze. "I think it's time we spoke frankly about what you two have been doing." David forced a smirk, trying to maintain his composure and act as if he was uninvolved. "Not sure what you're implying," David replied, his tone full of defiance. Mike offered a slight smile, then opened his briefcase, took out a thick folder, and placed it on the table. "We have sufficient evidence of your abuse of power," he said, never breaking eye contact. "It's all been gathered and verified, from witnesses to internal documents. You can't avoid responsibility anymore." David and Steve's confidence began to waver. David leaned forward, his gaze flickering as he glanced at the thick folder on the table. Steve sat rigidly, gripping the arm of his chair. They started to realize that this wasn't a routine confrontation. Mike had concrete evidence, and this was more of a sentencing than a discussion. Mike continued, his tone becoming sharper. He pointed to each item in the folder, meticulously listing the clear evidence of times they had used their power to manipulate decisions, impact staff, and influence important contracts. "We have statements from employees who endured your coercion. Every document, from emails to recordings of secret meetings, is here." Steve gulped, his eyes now filled with panic. "This is all lies." He tried to protest, his voice shaky. "You can't accuse us without concrete proof." Mike looked at him coldly. "Concrete proof? You'll see all the concrete proof in the report that will be sent to the board and investigative authorities next week. But perhaps you should review these yourself before attempting any defense," he said, pushing the folder toward them. David took the folder, his hands trembling as he flipped through each page. His face turned pale as he saw the unmistakable evidence of his actions. Emails with threatening content and documents showing pressure exerted on subordinates for personal gain. He couldn't believe that everything had been exposed to this extent. The power game he had once prided himself on was now turning against him. Mike emphasized each word. "You disregarded every ethical principle using your position to abuse power. But now justice will not allow you to evade it." Steve lowered his head, all strength to resist draining away. He understood that every door had closed. There was no escape left. Mike's words echoed like a final verdict, an undeniable truth. The manipulations and the schemes for personal gain were now fully exposed, and they had to face the consequences of their actions. Mike concluded with a firm voice, "You may have thought that power would help you cover everything up. But today, you see that justice will always prevail, and that righteousness will never be forgotten." The intense confrontation ended, leaving David and Steve humiliated and seething with anger. The irrefutable evidence Mike presented in front of the entire station had shamed them, stripping them of the power they once held as untouchable. Forced to temporarily leave their positions and face a thorough investigation, David and Steve felt as if the entire world had turned against them. But deep down, they weren't ready to surrender. David, his eyes filled with rage, turned to Steve as they left the station. "We can't let him humiliate us like this," he said coldly. "Does he think he can change everything just by sitting in the chief's chair? He'll pay for this." Steve nodded, the bitterness and hatred visible in his eyes. "But he has the evidence, David. If we do anything against him, it'll only make things worse." David sneered, his face twisted with cunning. "Maybe we can't touch him directly, but what about his family? He'll think twice if the safety of his loved ones is at risk." Their plan for revenge began to take shape quietly, targeting not Mike directly, but his family. They believed that threatening his loved ones could force Mike to back down, maybe even give up on his reforms and retreat. David and Steve had no qualms about descending into such darkness to reclaim the power and status they believed was theirs. One night, as Mike returned home, he sensed something was off. The front door was still locked, but a piece of paper was discreetly taped under the doorframe. He picked it up, opened it, and read the scrawled message, "Stop, or your family will pay the price." Beneath the words was a photo of his family, his wife and 2 children happily playing in the park, a simple yet meaningful image for him that had now been twisted into a veiled threat. Mike felt his heart tighten. He had faced many dangers in his career, but never had he confronted a threat to his loved ones. The feeling of unease washed over him, and he knew that David and Steve were behind it. But almost immediately, fear gave way to anger. They had crossed a line, violating all ethics by threatening his family. With steely resolve, Mike didn't allow fear to cloud his judgment. He called Thomas to discuss the situation, his voice steady but his gaze intense. "They think they can scare me with this," Mike said, his tone calm yet firm. "But they're wrong. We'll take them down, not just for justice, but for the safety of my family and everyone else they've threatened." Thomas nodded, concern evident in his expression, but he knew Mike was strong and wouldn't back down easily. "We'll have to be more cautious," Thomas replied. "I'll help you tighten security around your family. We also need to closely monitor David and Steve's every move. They're more dangerous than ever." Mike and Thomas crafted a counter-strategy together. Mike hired a professional security team to protect his wife and 2 children, ensuring they remained safe at all times. He also temporarily moved his family to a secure location to avoid David and Steve's watchful eyes while maintaining remote surveillance. Meanwhile, David and Steve began to feel the pressure as their every move was being monitored. Most other officers in the station, recognizing the changes Mike was bringing, no longer shielded or supported the 2 of them. They started to notice that every action seemed to be under scrutiny. Every time they entered the station, they felt the wary gazes of colleagues, eroding the trust and respect they had once commanded. But the danger from David and Steve persisted. One evening, while Mike was working in his office, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, cold. "Listen, Anderson, if you want your family safe, stop the investigation. We don't want anyone to get hurt, right?" Mike's heart pounded, but he maintained a calm tone. "I don't know who you are, but if you think you can intimidate me, you're mistaken." He hung up before the caller could respond, understanding that he couldn't afford to be complacent. The threat had escalated, and he knew David and Steve had nothing left to lose. Following that call, Mike knew he had to act swiftly before things got worse. He met with Thomas and a few trusted colleagues, sharing the new danger he faced. They decided to initiate a covert investigation to uncover anyone assisting David and Steve in their sordid plans. Mike also extended the surveillance, not only to monitor David and Steve, but to identify any possible accomplices. Every action of the 2 was now closely tracked, from phone calls and messages to secret meetings. During this time, Mike continued with his reforms at the station, remaining calm as if unaffected by the threats. He wanted David and Steve to believe that their plan wasn't working and that he wouldn't back down from any intimidation. His resilience and composure earned him even greater respect and trust from his colleagues. As for David and Steve, realizing that threatening Mike's family wasn't having the desired effect, they began to flounder and show signs of panic. They repeatedly tried to contact their covert connections to further their vendetta, but even those who once supported them now hesitated, seeing that Mike wasn't one to surrender. The two found themselves trapped in the mess they had created, as every resource dwindled and each scheme crumbled. Gradually, Mike gathered enough evidence not only of David and Steve's abuse of power, but also clear indications of their conspiracy to threaten and endanger his family. Everything was ready for the final confrontation. Mike decided not only to expose their abuses, but to publicly reveal their threats against his family, so that his colleagues and the community would see their true nature. On that morning, with the station fully assembled, Mike summoned David and Steve to the main meeting room. In the charged atmosphere of the hearing, the cold, overhead lights cast a sharp glare, intensifying the tense silence in the room. The space was packed. Officers from the department, community representatives, and several reporters eager to follow this pivotal confrontation. All eyes were fixed on Mike Anderson, the new police chief, as he faced the two officers accused of abusing their power, David and Steve. Mike, maintaining a calm but commanding presence, sat down opposite them, his gaze never leaving the two men who had misused their authority to manipulate, intimidate, and oppress those they were sworn to protect. Without hesitation, he met their eyes with a steady, penetrating look, as if seeking to unearth the layers of pretense they might still try to hide behind. David broke the silence first, but his voice lacked the usual confidence and arrogance, replaced instead by a faint hint of defiance. "Mike, do you think you can punish us?" he scoffed, his tone laced with disdain. "You've only just arrived. You have no idea what it takes to keep this place safe." Mike responded with a faint smile, unshaken by David's bravado. Sitting up straight, his voice cut through the silence of the room. "Keeping this place safe? David, you think that using fear and intimidation to suppress the people you're supposed to protect counts as safety?" His words were like blows striking at the core of David's self-assured facade. "Our job is to protect the community, not terrorize them." David's face twitched, betraying his discomfort, but he forced a smirk, unwilling to show weakness. "You don't understand, Mike. Sometimes we have to do what's necessary. Sometimes people need to be taught respect." Mike leaned forward, his gaze cold and unrelenting. "Respect?" he echoed, each word heavy with contempt. "Is that how you justify abusing your power, threatening citizens, even going so far as to threaten my family?" His voice was low, each syllable a rebuke that resonated in the silence. Steve, sitting beside David, shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. He muttered, barely audible, as if trying to excuse himself. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone, Mike. It's just, sometimes the stress of the job can lead to bad decisions." Mike seized on his words instantly, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "Stress? Your choices left people living in fear, subjected to injustice. You use this badge to inflict harm, not to uphold the law." A hush fell over the room, each of Mike's words sinking deep, making an indelible impact. As he continued, his voice grew even more resolute. "You betrayed the trust that the public placed in us, turning this place into a stage for your egotism and greed. But today, you will face the truth and pay for what you've done." Realizing that they were cornered, David sprang to his feet, his voice shaken with anger and desperation. "You don't get it, Mike. Do you think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a fool who believes he can change everything. But soon, the system will chew you up, just like it did to so many others." Mike remained seated, his gaze filled with disdain. "If the system allows people like you to run unchecked, that's exactly why I'm here to change it. This badge isn't a shield for wrongdoing. If you think that abuse is the only way to control others, then you don't belong here." Those present at the hearing looked at Mike with respect and admiration. They saw not just a police chief, but someone willing to stand up for justice, someone who would not back down in the face of adversity. Mike's unwavering stance inspired everyone in the room, and the community watching knew they had the right leader at last. The supervisor, seated at the end of the conference table, nodded solemnly at the evidence Mike had laid out and signaled to the security officers. "Escort them out," he ordered. Security moved to David and Steve, whose initial defiance was now replaced by visible panic and dread. David struggled against them, his eyes wild with fear as he realized the game was over. "You'll regret this, Mike. I swear you'll regret it," he shouted. But Mike remained calm, his expression unmoved. "I have no regrets in standing up for justice," Mike replied coolly, "but you'll regret every moment you spent betraying the trust of this community." As David and Steve were escorted out, Mike felt a profound sense of relief. He had kept his promise to himself and the community. Those who had abused their power were now facing the consequences, and justice had been served. No matter the dangers or threats, he would never abandon his ideals. As others in the room rose, several colleagues and officers looked at Mike with newfound respect and admiration. They understood that, under his leadership, they would work in an environment of integrity and honesty, where justice would always come first. The supervisor approached Mike, shaking his hand firmly. "You did well, Mike. Today, you've shown us what real justice looks like. You have our full support." Mike nodded, feeling a quiet sense of peace and satisfaction. He knew that this battle was just a small part of a longer journey. There was still much to be done to root out corruption and abuse in the police force, but with the support of his loyal colleagues, he was confident in creating lasting change. As he stepped out of the hearing room into the glow of the morning sun, it felt like a fresh start for justice and integrity within the police force. With each step, Mike felt pride in staying true to his values. Whatever the future held, he knew he had fought for what was right, and nothing could shake that determination. After David and Steve were dismissed, a new atmosphere filled the police station. The power abusers had paid the price, and under Mike Anderson's leadership, positive changes began spreading throughout the department. As police chief, Mike knew he was responsible not only for maintaining the integrity of the force, but also for rebuilding the trust between police and the community, a trust eroded over years by officers like David and Steve. The first community meetings Mike organized were filled with caution. Residents, long disillusioned by failed reforms and broken promises, arrived with mixed feelings of hope and skepticism. But Mike didn't let their doubts deter him. He addressed the crowd, not as an authoritative figure, but as a neighbor committed to the neighborhood's safety. "I know that over the years, trust in the police has severely eroded," Mike said, his gaze steady and sincere. "I can't erase what happened in the past, but I can promise that from now on, We'll build a new relationship, one based on mutual respect and trust." Mike's words were a heartfelt promise, and they resonated with the crowd. An older woman stood up, her voice trembling as she recounted how her son had been threatened by David and Steve simply for questioning an unreasonable demand. She looked at Mike, searching for empathy. "We lived in fear, worried that we'd pay a price if we didn't comply. Do you understand, Chief?" Mike nodded, feeling the pain and frustration in her words. "I understand, and I'm truly sorry for what you've been through. From now on, anyone who abuses their power will be held accountable. No exceptions." His response sparked a shift in the room. Slowly, residents began to feel the sincerity in his words, and one by one, they stood up to share their own stories. The fear receded as they started to believe that this time, their new police chief might indeed bring about real change. Mike didn't stop at words. He and his officers took concrete steps to mend the relationship with the community. He organized joint patrols, encouraging officers to engage with residents, learn about their issues, and understand their concerns. Officers who had once seemed detached found themselves becoming part of the communities they served, feeling a renewed sense of purpose in their work. Beside Mike was Thomas, his steadfast and loyal colleague. Thomas was not only a strong right-hand man, but also a bridge between Mike and the other officers. With his calm demeanor and unwavering dedication to justice, Thomas was among the staunchest supporters of Mike's reforms. One evening, after a community patrol, Thomas joined Mike in his office. With a look of respect, he said, "Mike, I've seen leaders come and go, but none have done what you're doing. You've sparked a new spirit, not just in the station but in the hearts of the community. You've given us a reason to believe that justice is still alive in this system." Mike smiled, feeling encouraged by Thomas's words. "Thomas, I couldn't do this alone. Your support and the support of our colleagues are what keep me going. We can't change everything overnight, but if we persevere, I believe we can make a real difference." The team's backing provided Mike with the strength to press forward. He organized workshops on professional ethics and social justice, inviting experts to share knowledge and skills with the officers to help them handle challenging situations without resorting to misuse of authority. These sessions didn't just clarify the officers' responsibilities, but also rekindled pride and commitment in their roles. Robert, another dedicated ally, played a crucial role in training and reform initiatives. Mike fostered an environment where everyone could speak up without fear of punishment, and Robert often mentored younger officers, helping them understand the importance of fairness and honesty. One morning, a young officer spoke up in a team meeting saying, "Since you arrived, Chief, I've realized we can work with integrity and pride. No one forces us to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing anymore, and that means a lot. Thank you for creating an environment we can truly believe in." Mike was moved by these words. He knew his efforts were not only transforming the lives of community members, but also helping his officers find the real purpose of their work. Every day, he felt he was getting closer to his goal of a clean, honest, and justice-oriented police force. But Mike didn't stop there. He introduced community partnership programs, creating communication channels for residents to report suspicious activities without fear of reprisal. He established an independent oversight body to ensure that all reports were handled transparently and fairly. One day, while on patrol, a young boy approached Mike, looking up at him with admiration. "I want to grow up to be a policeman like you," the boy said. Mike smiled, crouching down to his level. "Being a policeman means being brave, honest, and always protecting others. If you promise to do that, I know you'll make a great officer." Mike's words weren't just for the boy, they were a reminder to all his colleagues of the responsibility and true meaning of their work. Each patrol and every community meeting was a chance to reinforce this ideal and build a police force the public could rely on. Under Mike Anderson's leadership, the police station transformed from a source of fear and distrust to a symbol of safety and integrity. Residents felt reassured seeing officers patrolling the streets. Community meetings became forums for storytelling, feedback, and collaboration. The bond between the police and the community strengthened, and everyone recognized that Mike had ushered in a new era for the precinct. Outside the station, Mike looked out into the distance, his gaze full of confidence and determination. He knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, but he was undeterred. With the support of Robert, Thomas, and loyal colleagues, he had proven that justice could prevail, that integrity and courage could bring about change. In the hearts of every officer and citizen, a newfound belief in justice and integrity had been rekindled, a belief that Mike Anderson would continue to protect and uphold. He knew more challenges lay ahead, but with a steadfast commitment to his mission, he was ready to keep moving forward, bringing the light of justice to the community he had sworn to serve. The peaceful days following the hearing were just a brief calm in Mike's ongoing fight. Despite having dismissed David and Steve, Mike knew the journey ahead was still full of challenges. The kind of power those like them once wielded to instill fear and control isn't easily dismantled. Mike understood this well, but didn't anticipate that they would try to make a comeback so soon. One night, after a long day's work, Mike returned home to find an unmarked brown envelope at his doorstep, his name scribbled hastily on it. His guard went up as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note with just a few menacing lines. "Don't think you've won. This game isn't over. You might have thrown us out of the station, but you can't keep us away forever. We'll be back, and when we are, things won't be the same. Watch your back, Anderson. We'll find a way to reclaim what's ours." Mike took in each word, sensing the revenge-fueled bitterness of David and Steve. The letter, though brief, was a chilling reminder that the battle was far from over. They might be out of the station, but their resentment burned on, like embers waiting to ignite. Folding the letter calmly, Mike didn't let these threats distract him from his goals. He'd faced threats before and knew this wouldn't be the last. Still, he didn't take it lightly. People like David and Steve, stripped of their power, often go to extreme lengths to try to regain it. That night, Mike stored the letter away and sat alone in his office at the station, lit only by his desk lamp, its glow casting shadows on his resolute face. Reflecting on his chosen path, Mike felt more committed than ever to the values he was protecting. These threats didn't scare him. Instead, they reminded him why he had to keep going. The next morning, Mike met with Robert and Thomas, his most trusted colleagues, and showed them the letter. Thomas's face tightened with concern, and Robert's expression darkened as they read. Thomas looked up, visibly worried and angry. "I knew they wouldn't give up easily, but I didn't think they'd resort to threats this soon. This is a blatant challenge." Robert clenched his jaw. "They think they can take back their power by threatening us, but they're wrong, Mike. We'll stand by you and defend everything we've built together." Mike smiled with a calm resolve. "I appreciate your support. I'm not afraid, and if they think these threats will make me back down, they're sorely mistaken. We've come too far to turn back now. They can try, but we'll always be ready." Mike's words inspired his friends, making them proud to stand by such a strong leader. They knew the path would be challenging, but with Mike's resilience, they were confident in the future. In the days that followed, Mike continued his reforms and strengthened ties with the community, knowing that strong public support would help withstand any resistance. Each week, he led community meetings, listening to residents' concerns and fostering mutual understanding. One evening, after a meeting, a middle-aged man approached Mike. With gratitude in his eyes, he said, "I used to think the police would never change, that they'd always abuse their power, but you've given us hope. You've proven that there are those willing to protect justice." Mike's heart warmed at these words, knowing that change was indeed happening. Despite the challenges ahead, he wasn't alone. The community had started to believe in him, and he wouldn't let them down. Still, each night alone in his office, he couldn't ignore the threat from David and Steve. He knew that this fight wasn't over with one hearing. The darkness they represented remained, lurking in the shadows. One evening, just as he was about to leave the station, Mike received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep and familiar. It was David. "Think you've won, Anderson?" David's tone was icy. "We'll be back, and next time it won't just be letters. You'll pay for what you've done." Unmoved, Mike's voice stayed calm and firm. "You can try whatever you want, David, but remember, justice isn't something you can buy or intimidate away. No matter what schemes you bring, my team and I will be ready. You're wrong to think fear will make us back down." The call ended, but Mike remained seated, listening to the silence that filled the room. A mixture of calm and determination filled his heart. The threats from David and Steve felt like a fleeting chill, unable to disturb the resolve of someone devoted to justice. He knew this battle wouldn't end with just a hearing or a dismissal. People like David and Steve, those accustomed to power and control, wouldn't give up easily. Mike told himself he couldn't be swayed by such threats. He had seen injustice and abuses of power since the beginning of his career, and that was precisely why he chose this path, not for fame, but for the belief that everyone deserves protection and fairness. His will grew stronger, knowing that somewhere in this city there were people who had endured the cruelty of those abusing authority, hoping that he would bring true justice. Mike was fighting not only for himself, but for those who couldn't raise their voices, for those who lived in fear every time they encountered people meant to protect them. The threatening letter and David's call did not instill fear. Instead, they solidified his purpose. With every passing day, Mike felt he was getting closer to rebuilding the community's trust in the police force. Every step he took, every small reform he made, and every conversation he shared with the community reinforced his commitment. It wasn't just a fight against those abusing power. This was Mike's journey to reaffirm the true meaning of being a police officer. It was not about authority or control, but the duty to protect and serve. Every promise he made to the community and every show of support he received from his colleagues only fueled his strength and determination. Ultimately, Mike knew this journey would be long and filled with obstacles. David and Steve might come back with new schemes, and other abuses of power might arise, but Mike would never let that darkness overshadow his ideals. He would always remember that, no matter how difficult the challenges, justice and integrity would guide him. This isn't an end, but a message to all those who dare to stand up for justice. Mike will continue on his path, no matter the dangers, to uphold the ideals he chose, because he believes that, despite challenges, the courage and unwavering resolve of people like him will always light the way, affirming that justice and integrity will prevail, however long it may take. This story is a powerful lesson for anyone who underestimates others. What do you think of how this police chief responded to injustice? Was it the right choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more impactful stories. See you in the next video.